My husband controlled everything until the day an old house in Maine, the only thing in my name on the transfer contract, fell into my hands. Tonight I am telling you how I walked out of a golden cage with nothing but $65 and a secret that can destroy a dynasty. Welcome to Stories of Auntie Maya. I share new life stories here every day, and I'd really appreciate it if you hit subscribe and liked my video. Drop a comment down below telling me where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. I read every single comment, and it helps me to know I'm not alone in this. My name is Eleanor Vance, but the little girl I used to be is still Ellie. 47 years old now, and some mornings I wake up surprised the mirror shows a woman with silver threads at her temples. I was once the youngest senior architect at Grayson and Pierce. They said I had magic in my fingers. I could walk onto a site and see the finished building before a single brick was laid. My bridges curved like birds taking flight. My libraries felt like churches for books. I won awards that now sit in boxes in storage because Marcus said they cluttered the shelves. I married him 12 years ago. I tell myself I was not stupid, only in love. He stood in my tiny apartment holding daisies from the corner deli and promised he would never clip my wings. 2 weeks after the wedding, he asked, so gently, if I would consider consulting for his family's development company instead of staying at the firm. It would mean we travel together, he said. No more nights apart. I thought it was romantic. By the time I understood the cage door had closed, the key was already in his pocket. People think money makes you free. Let me tell you the truth. When someone else holds every dollar with your name near it, you become a ghost wearing expensive clothes. Everything is in his name or jointly controlled. My phone, my cards, even the air in the penthouse feels monitored. I have no cash, no credit he doesn't see, no assets he can't freeze with a single text. For years, I've been a ghost in couture. This morning, everything changed. I was slicing a peach in our 42nd floor kitchen when a lawyer called on the burner phone I keep hidden in a coat lining. My great-aunt Clara had died and left me Oak Haven Manor plus 20 acres of land. The deed is coming in my name alone. No co-signers, no spousal rights, nothing Marcus can touch. Minutes later, my regular phone went dead. A message from him slid across the screen. Electronics are expensive, darling. Remember who pays for them. He came home that evening already knowing. Poured a whiskey, stared at the Hudson, and told me that I'd sign a power of attorney tomorrow and we'd sell the place at once. Taxes, upkeep, practicality, all the reasonable words he uses when he's giving orders. I looked at him and said, no. One word. It felt like breaking a bone that had healed wrong years ago. Tonight he's asleep down the hall. Every joint account now needs his fingerprint to open. Every card pings his phone. I have $65 in cash and the clothes I can carry. Tomorrow morning I'm taking the earliest train north. I don't know what kind of shape the house is in. I don't know what Marcus will do when he wakes up and finds me gone. I only know one thing for certain. For the first time in 12 years, I own something he can't take away. Come here, darling. Let me show you what my mornings look like before the mass goes on. The sun rises over the East River and pours gold across 42 floors of glass and marble. And for 1 minute, the whole penthouse glows like heaven. That is the minute I hate the most, because it is beautiful and it is all a lie. I'm already awake. I've been awake since 4, sitting at the little table by the window with a cup of tea gone cold. In front of me is the only thing in this apartment that truly belongs to me, a cheap spiral notebook from the corner pharmacy. Inside are drawings no one will ever build, a library with a roof that opens like a flower, a school where every classroom has a tree growing through the floor, a tiny house on stilts above the ocean so a woman can hear the waves when she wakes up alone and unafraid. My pencil moves softly so the guards in the cameras Marcus installed will not hear. I close the notebook and slide it under a stack of glossy magazines that still have my face on the cover from 7 years ago. Then I open my wallet. Go on, look with me. 3 $20 bills folded so many times they feel like cloth. 1 $5 with a coffee stain. That is every cent I own that does not report back to him. No black card, no platinum card, no debit card with my name alone. Only these tired little bills I saved from tips strangers gave me when I pretended I still worked. The wallet snaps shut like a mouth that has nothing left to say. Something inside me twists hard. I walk to the window. Below us, the city hurries to work. Tiny people who believe money keeps them safe. I press my palm to the cold glass and whisper to the woman I used to be, "Hold on just a little longer." Behind me, the front door opens. Marcus is home early from his run. I hear the soft thud of his sneakers, the jangle of keys he never loses, because losing things is for people who do not own the world. He comes up behind me, slips his arms around my waist, and rests his chin on my shoulder the way lovers do in movies. His breath smells like wintergreen. "Drawing again?" he asks, gentle. "I bought everything you need," he continues, voice warm. "The drafting table that cost more than a car. The Italian pencils sharp enough to sign your name in blood. Why are you using these cheap things, Ellie?" He reaches past me and taps the cover of the spiral notebook with one perfectly manicured finger. I feel the tap like a slap. "Some thoughts need cheap paper," I say. The words come out steady. I do not know where I found the courage. He laughs softly and kisses the side of my neck. "You are funny today." Then he walks away to shower, singing under his breath, certain the world is still exactly where he left it. I stand at the window a long time, but something is coming. I feel it the way sailors feel storms long before the sky changes. A house, an old house on the coast of Maine that no one has lived in for 20 years. A house with my name about to be written on the deed in ink he cannot erase. The phone in the kitchen lights up. A notification from the estate lawyer I contacted in secret. The message is only 4 words, but they land inside my chest like the first crack of thunder. Title transfer begins tomorrow. I close my eyes and see the gray shingles of Oak Haven Manor, the widow's walk where grandmother used to stand watching for ships that never came home. I see the wide porch where I learned to draw with charcoal on butcher paper. I see the future waiting for me there, small and frightened, but alive. Marcus is still singing in the shower. Water drums against marble loud enough to cover the sound of my heart breaking open. I pick up the cheap notebook, press it to my chest, and promise the woman in the window, one more day, and we start walking north. The city keeps shining below us, beautiful and cruel. And for the first time in years, I am not afraid of the dark. I am afraid of staying in the light that is not mine. Grandmother stood with me on the widow's walk of Oak Haven Manor that summer evening. She cupped my face in her rough hands that still smelled of rosemary and earth from the garden, looked straight through my eyes into the places I had not yet learned to hide, and spoke the sentence that would one day save my life. "The only things no one can ever take from you, Eleanor, are the brilliance God placed in your mind and a house that carries your name alone on the deed, because intellect can be starved but never stolen. And a piece of land with your name carved in the county records is a route that reaches all the way to the center of the earth." I remember nodding solemnly even though I was only 12 and more interested in chasing fireflies than understanding inheritance law. Yet those words sank into me the way tide sinks into sand, slow and certain and impossible to wash away. Tonight I sit in the hush of our Manhattan penthouse, where every surface gleams like it is afraid to collect dust, and I open the spiral notebook that cost 99 cents at the corner drugstore, the one Marcus pretends not to notice because noticing would force him to admit I still own something he did not buy. My pencil moves across the cheap paper, sketching a library whose roof opens like the petals of a moonflower, so children can read beneath real stars. And I feel grandmother's hands on my cheeks again across all the years and all the lies. The front door sighs open with the familiar hush of money greeting money, and Marcus steps inside, bringing the cold night air with him, snowflakes melting on the shoulders of a coat that cost more than most families earn in a month. He pauses when he sees the notebook glowing under the small circle of lamplight, tilts his head the way a cat tilts its head before it decides whether the bird is worth the chase. And then he smiles the smile that once made me believe I had been chosen by destiny itself. "I bought everything you need to draw, Ellie," he says. The drafting table carved from a single piece of walnut, the lamp that recreates daylight at any hour, the pencils flown in from Tuscany because you once mentioned you liked the way they felt in your hand. So tell me, darling, why you insist on scratching your beautiful ideas onto paper that tears if you breathe too hard. He says all of this while removing his coat and folding it with the precision of a man who has never once in his life been forced to pick up after himself, and the question hangs in the air. I close the notebook slowly, feeling the metal spiral bite into my palm the way truth sometimes bites, and I answer him with the calm that comes when a woman finally understands the game is almost over. Because some dreams refuse to live on anything that belongs to someone else, Marcus. And these lines are the only part of me you have not yet managed to purchase. For one heartbeat, the smile falters, something raw and ancient flickering behind his eyes, like lightning trapped inside a jar. And then the mask slips back into place, smoother than ever. He walks to the bar and speaks to the window instead of to me, telling the city lights that we will discuss the main property in the morning, that the taxes on that crumbling house will devour any sentimental attachment I still harbor, that a simple signature on a power of attorney will spare me the burden of decisions I am clearly too delicate to make alone. I stand here in a room that costs more to heat for 1 month than my grandmother earned in a year of growing roses for florists, holding 99 pages of rebellion bound by wire, and I feel the cliff beneath Oakhaven Manor calling my name across 300 miles of darkening land and sea. Marcus wants to level those cliffs, pour concrete, build towers that will bear the Thorn name in letters, tall enough to be seen from passing ships, because that is what men like him do when they discover a piece of earth that still belongs to a woman who is learning how to say no. But grandmother's voice rises, reminding me that a house with my name on the deed is coming, and when it arrives, it will carry me out of this gilded prison the way Noah's Ark carried the faithful through the storm. Marcus turns from the window, lifts his glass in a small salute that is not a salute at all, and tells me to sleep well because tomorrow we will put an end to childish attachments. Come here, my sweet friend. Let the city keep its noise outside these tall windows while I show you the moment everything inside me began to burn instead of merely smolder. Marcus had gone to bed believing his last quiet threat about the main property had settled the matter like dust on a closed book, yet I sat at the kitchen island long after midnight with the hidden phone trembling in my palm, the one I bought with cash from a street vendor who never asked my name. And when the screen lit up with an email from the Portland law firm, I felt the floor tilt beneath the marble the way the cliffs at Oakhaven tilt toward the sea. The subject line was simple. Final Notice of Inheritance. Oakhaven Manor, 114 Cliff Road, Owl's Head, Maine. I opened it with a finger that would not stop shaking and read that my great-aunt Clara, the last quiet guardian of grandmother's wishes, had died peacefully in her sleep at 93 and had left the entire estate to me alone. No co-owners, no spousal consent required, no possibility of challenge once the deed recorded at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. The words blurred because tears came faster than I expected, tears of terror and relief so tangled together I could not tell which was winning. I was still staring at the screen when Marcus walked in, wearing the dark silk pajamas that cost more than most wedding dresses, barefoot on the heated floors, hair tousled exactly enough to look innocent. He glanced at the phone in my hand, and something electric passed across his face before the mask slid back into place. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked, voice soft. I closed the email and turned the screen face down. "Aunt Clara died," I said, surprising myself with how steady the words came out. "She left me Oakhaven." For one heartbeat, the kitchen was perfectly still, the way the air goes still before lightning splits the sky. "Ellie, darling," he began, setting the glass down with deliberate care. That house has been bleeding money for decades. The property taxes alone are obscene. The roof leaks in 17 places, and the town has it zoned for nothing except the resort I have been trying to build there for 6 years. He stepped closer, reached out as if to smooth my hair the way he did when we were first married, and continued in the same gentle tone that has broken stronger women than me. Sign the power of attorney tomorrow morning and let me sell it to the development trust. I will put every penny into an account with your name on it, tax-free, and you will never have to worry about a single repair or bill again. I felt the walls lean inward the way they do in nightmares. I have not decided what I want to do with it, I answered. His hand stopped an inch from my cheek. The smile stayed, but the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Then let me help you decide, he said, and the kindness in his voice was the most frightening thing I have ever heard. You will be on that cliff alone with no heat, no credit cards, no cash, and no way to pay the back taxes that are already 6 figures. Be reasonable, Eleanor. Sign the papers and we forget this conversation ever happened. He kissed my forehead the way a king kisses a coin before he melts it down, then walked back to the bedroom expecting my footsteps to follow like they always have. I waited until his door closed, then opened the banking app on the hidden phone with fingers that finally stopped shaking. The joint accounts looked exactly the same until I tried to transfer $50 from savings to checking. The way I sometimes do when I need cash, he will not notice. A new red banner appeared across the screen. This transaction requires 2-factor authentication from the primary account holder. I stared at it for a long time while the refrigerator hummed its expensive lullaby and the city glittered 42 floors below like a promise it never intended to keep. Marcus had not been waiting for my answer. He had already changed every lock on every door I thought I still had a key to. Marcus woke me at 6 with the soft command that always sounds like a caress. Rooftop gala at the new Hudson Yards Tower, Ellie. Wear the midnight silk, the one that makes you look untouchable. Everyone who matters will be there, and they need to see that we are perfect. I wanted to stay in bed with the covers over my head and the hidden phone clutched to my heart, but he was already choosing cufflinks the size of coins. And when I opened my mouth to refuse, he simply smiled and added, "It is only 2 hours, darling. Then we come home and you can sign the power of attorney like a good wife." So I let the stylist curl my hair into the waves he likes, let the makeup artist paint away the sleepless shadows under my eyes, let them zip me into a dress that cost more than most cars, and I smiled the smile I have practiced in mirrors since the day I understood that silence is sometimes the only safe answer. The party spilled across the glass sky terrace 77 floors above the city, champagne flowing like rivers and diamonds catching the lights of helicopters circling below us like curious fireflies. Marcus moved through the crowd the way a shark moves through smaller fish, shaking hands that controlled billions, laughing at jokes that were never funny. His arm locked around my waist so tightly I could feel every heartbeat he pretended was calm. "Marcus Thorne, you slippery bastard. Heard you finally bought that Maine property after all these years. Been stalled for 30 damn years, hasn't it? Your old man must be spinning in his grave that you closed the deal before he did." The voice belonged to Walter Grayson, my first boss, the man who taught me how to read load-bearing walls the way other people read faces. He was red-cheeked from champagne and loud enough that conversation around us died like someone had pressed mute. I felt Marcus go rigid beside me, every muscle turning to stone beneath the perfect tuxedo. The smile stayed on his mouth but drained from his eyes so completely that for one terrifying second, he looked like a corpse still wearing lipstick. Walter kept talking, oblivious. "Cliff Road, right? That old battle axe Clara finally sold? Hell of a fight she put up. Thought the state would have to seize it for taxes before anyone got those acres." Marcus's hand clamped down on my elbow hard enough to leave bruises under the silk sleeve. His face had gone the color of paper left in sunlight too long. I caught glimpses of shocked faces, frozen champagne glasses, and blossoming whispers. He pulled me into the private elevator, slamming his hand against the close button until we were sealed inside the descending mirrored box. Only then did he release my arm. He stared straight at our reflection. He was pale and trembling with suppressed rage, and I was intensely alert. I thought about 30 years ago, long before he met me, and decided I would be a jewel for his empire. I asked him what happened on that land 30 years ago that made him look like he had just seen his own grave open up. His reflection met my eyes, and for the first time since our marriage, I saw pure fear in him. The elevator doors slid open to the underground garage. He grabbed my wrist again and dragged me toward the car, his fingers digging in. We were almost at the black SUV when I planted my feet, forcing him to stop. "Answer me," I whispered. He looked around as though the concrete pillars themselves might be listening, then leaned in so close I smelled the champagne he had not actually drunk. "Get in the car, Eleanor," he said, every word carved from ice. "Some questions cost more than you will ever be able to pay." He shoved me into the back seat and slammed the door so hard the glass trembled. As the driver pulled away, I pressed my forehead to the cold window and watched the garage light slide across my reflection like bars. Something happened on those cliffs that still has the power to turn Marcus Thorne, the man who owns half of Manhattan, the color of a corpse. We had left the city lights behind hours ago, the highway unrolling like a black ribbon through pine forests that swallowed every trace of civilization. When Marcus finally spoke the words he had been chewing on since Walter's careless toast. "You are going to sign the power of attorney the minute we reach the house," he said, voice so calm it felt refrigerated. "I have already spoken to the notary in Rockland. He will meet us at 9 tomorrow when the deed records. One signature, Eleanor, and this sentimental nonsense ends." I watched the white lines flicker past the window and answered without turning. "No." The single word hung between us like a blade. "Then let me explain what no looks like, darling. If you keep that rotting pile of shingles, I will cut off every card tonight, freeze every joint account by morning, and cancel the household charge accounts before you finish your coffee. You will not have a penny in cash, not $1 for gas, not one dime for a cup of tea in whatever sad little diner you crawl to when the heat fails and the pipes burst." I felt each threat land like a stone in my stomach, yet something inside me refused to flinch. "You need that land very badly for a man who claims it is worthless," I said, finally turning to look at him. 30 years is a long time to wait for rotting shingles, Marcus. His eyes narrowed to slits of ice. "Careful. Some doors, once opened, cannot be closed again." I leaned forward, telling Marcus that perhaps it was time someone opened the windows and swept out whatever had been stinking up those cliffs since before I was born. Even the driver could feel the tension. Marcus sat back, then delivered his final blow. He said in a soft voice that by sunrise I would be begging to sign. He stressed that I had never had to endure hunger, cold, or standing in a grocery line with a declined card. He insisted that he had protected me from all of that and told me to remember what it felt like to be protected when I chose to throw it away. The snow fell thicker. I watched them melt on the glass, feeling the last chain inside me break. When we reached the Oak Haven gate, I ordered the car to stop. Marcus protested, saying we were 2 miles from the house in a blizzard. I looked him in the eye, telling him I had been frozen for 12 years and would rather die in the warmth. I wrenched my hand free, opened the door, and stepped out into the storm. The snow lashed my face, but I didn't feel the cold. I only felt the road beneath my feet and the house waiting. The car door slammed shut behind me, and I heard Marcus call my name. I didn't turn around. I walked. One step, then another, the silk dress plastered to my legs, hair whipping across my eyes, breath clouding white in front of me, and every step took me farther from the man who believed money could own a soul. The taillights of the SUV glowed red through the snow, then blinked out as the car turned and disappeared back toward the city that had never once kept me safe. I stood alone on the dark road with $65 in a soaked evening clutch. No cards, no phone plan he could cancel, no heat except the fire that had finally caught inside my chest. Ahead, through the curtain of white, the shape of Oakhaven Manor rose against the sky, windows dark, chimneys reaching like arms ready to catch me. Behind me lay everything I was told a woman needs to survive. Ahead lay a house with my name on the deed, and somewhere inside its walls, whatever made Marcus Thorne afraid of ghosts that have been waiting 30 years for someone brave enough to listen. I started walking again straight toward the light I could not yet see, and I did not look back. Not once. I reached the front steps of Oakhaven just as the first pale edge of dawn touched the ocean. Soaked to the bone, lips blue, the midnight silk dress clinging like a second ruined skin. The key was exactly where Grandmother always left it, under the loose shingle to the left of the door, wrapped in oilcloth so the salt air would never rust it. And when the lock turned with the same familiar scrape I had known since childhood, I felt the house breathe around me the way a mother breathes when her lost child finally comes home. My frozen fingers found the hidden phone in my clutch, and I dialed the number I had memorized months ago. The lawyer in Portland answered the phone on the second ring, his voice gruff but sharpening when he heard mine. When he addressed me as Mrs. Thorne, I corrected him that I was Vance, feeling the name taste like freedom. I informed him that I had decided to file for divorce today. I stated that I had a separate asset that Marcus couldn't touch, with the deed of transfer having been recorded solely in my name at 9 o'clock this morning, and I instructed him to start the paperwork immediately. After a pause, the lawyer asked if I understood what I was stepping into, as Marcus Thorne did not take a loss quietly. I replied with a decisive tone that I was already walking. I had walked 2 miles through a blizzard to get here, and losing quietly was no longer an option. He promised to have everything prepared by noon and told me to stay warm, stay safe, and stay inside until he arrived. I hung up and turned toward the tall windows that faced the sea, watching the storm slowly loosen its grip on the sky. And that was when I saw it. A dark sedan parked just beyond the rusted gate, half hidden under the snow-laden branches of the old yew tree. Someone had been waiting for me. The car was expensive, anonymous, the kind of vehicle that costs more than most houses and carries tinted windows dark enough to hide every sin. I felt the tiny hairs on my arms rise. Marcus could not have arrived ahead of me, yet someone else knew I was coming. I walked to the window, pressed my palm to the cold glass, and stared out at the silent car while my heart pounded against my ribs like a bird beating itself against a cage it finally realized was open. The driver must have felt my gaze because the headlights suddenly flashed once, and then the engine roared to life with a sound that shattered the morning quiet. I reached for the heavy brass handle of the front door, pulled it open just as the sedan reversed in a spray of snow, tires spinning for purchase on the icy drive. I stepped onto the porch, barefoot on freezing wood, and watched the car tear away down the cliff road, taillights glowing red like angry eyes before they vanished around the bend. The storm swallowed the sound of the engine, leaving only the wind and the gulls and the slow drip of melting snow from the eaves. I stood there a long time, arms wrapped around myself, the soaked dress beginning to stiffen with ice, and I understood something with perfect, shivering clarity. Marcus was not the only one who had been watching this house for 30 years. Someone else had been waiting too. Someone who did not want me walking through that door any more than Marcus did. I turned back inside, closed the door, and leaned against it while the lock clicked like a heartbeat. The house was dark and cold and full of shadows that moved when I did not look directly at them. Yet for the first time in 12 years, I was on the right side of a locked door. I stood inside the locked door of Oakhaven long after the taillights disappeared, heart hammering so hard I had to lean against the wall to stay upright. The house was silent except for the wind rattling the old windows and the soft creak of beams remembering every winter they had survived. I needed someone who had known me before Marcus taught me to make myself small. I was still standing at the study window watching the gray Atlantic roll in like it wanted to confess something, when the phone buzzed again and Sarah's voice came through low and urgent. the way people speak when they are afraid the walls themselves might be listening. "Ellie, listen carefully," she said, her words tumbling over one another in a rush that told me she had locked her office door and was speaking with her hand cupped around the receiver. I sent everything I could pull without tripping the alarms Marcus had installed after he tried to buy Grayson. But there is one scanned page you need to see first, the one with the handwritten note on the 1995 survey, because whoever wrote it was terrified. And I think they were trying to warn your grandmother exactly the way someone tried to warn you this morning with that car. I opened the file again, heart pounding so hard I could barely hold the phone steady, and there it was, the cream memo paper with the bleeding ink and the words that turned my blood to ice water. I read aloud a text message related to Maine in 1995, advising against signing anything, no matter what the offer. The message also told me to ask Thorne because he knew what had happened to the surveyor who had said no. My voice trembled in the empty room, and I heard Sarah take a sharp breath on the other end of the line, as if she were in pain. "That note was clipped to a map of Oak Haven's coastline," she whispered. "And the surveyor it mentions, Thomas Caldwell, disappeared in October of 1995. The official report called it a boating accident. Body never found, but Ellie, his wife, swore he had been threatened by Thorne Holdings after he refused to falsify an environmental report, and she tried to sue, only every lawyer she approached suddenly withdrew, and then she moved to Canada and never spoke of it again." I pressed my forehead to the cold window glass and felt the house lean in around me, listening the way it always did when grandmother told stories about ships lost in fog. "Sarah," I said, and my voice came out steady despite the storm inside my chest. "The note says, ask Thorne." But Marcus would have been 23 that year, barely out of college, while his father was the one running everything. So, which Thorne were they afraid of, the dead king or the prince who inherited the throne? Silence stretched between us, thick as the snow piling against the windows, until Sarah finally answered in a voice so soft I had to strain to hear it. "That is the question I have been asking myself for 12 years. Ever since Marcus smiled at me across a conference table and told me you no longer had time for old friends who asked too many questions about Maine." I closed my eyes and saw grandmother on the widow's walk the summer she taught me that a house with your name on it is worth more than any man's promise. Saw the way her hands trembled when she thought I was not looking. Saw the way she locked the cellar door and told me some rooms were better left sleeping. "Sarah," I said, and the words tasted like steel, "whatever happened in 1995 is still alive in this house, and whoever drove that black car this morning knows I am here to wake it up." She drew another shaky breath and then spoke with the fierce love I had forgotten I was allowed to have. "Then wake it up, Ellie. Wake it up and burn the whole lie down if you have to. I will keep digging from this end, and if anyone comes for me, I will scream your name loud enough for the whole city to hear. You are not alone anymore." I stood there long after she hung up, holding the phone against my heart while the note's words burned behind my eyes. Ask Thorne, the father who died before I ever met his son, or the son who taught me that love could feel exactly like a cage with golden bars. One of them buried something on this land that still bleeds 30 years later. One of them made a surveyor disappear, and one of them married the granddaughter of the woman who refused to sign. I looked down at the phone, at the scanned note glowing on the screen like a warning from the grave, and I understood that the answer was waiting beneath this house, behind walls that have kept their silence since before I was born. I slipped the phone into the pocket of grandmother's old sweater, walked to the narrow door beneath the stairs that she always kept locked, and rested my hand on the knob that no key had turned in decades. "Come sit with me at the top of the cellar stairs, darling, because what I found down there in the dark has turned every breath I take into a question I am terrified to answer, and I need your hand in mine while I tell you how the house finally gave up its sharpest secret." After Sarah's warning still echoed in my ears, I stood before the narrow door beneath the main staircase that grandmother had kept locked for as long as I could remember, the one she would pass, with her eyes carefully averted whenever we carried laundry to the second floor. I had the old brass key from the envelope that appeared during the night, the one pushed through the mail slot by the same person who fled in the black car at dawn. And when I slid it into the lock, the tumblers turned with a soft, reluctant sigh, as though the house itself had been waiting 30 years for someone brave enough or foolish enough to open what should have stayed closed. The stairs descended in a tight spiral, stone walls weeping moisture that smelled of earth and iron and very old wine, and I went down slowly, one hand trailing along the wall for balance, the other holding the flashlight from the kitchen drawer that still contained batteries Grandmother had bought the year I left for college. I walked the length of the cellar twice, listening to the way my footsteps echoed differently near the far wall, noticing how the stonework there was just a fraction too regular, the mortar lines too crisp compared to the rough centuries-old work everywhere else. An architect learns to read walls the way sailors read the sea, and these stones were lying. I pressed my palm against the coldest section and felt the faintest give, a hollow sound beneath my knuckles that should not exist in solid granite. My fingers found the seam disguised as a natural crack, and when I pushed, with all the strength fear had suddenly given me, a section 2 feet wide and 6 feet tall swung inward on hidden hinges, so perfectly balanced they made no sound at all. Behind it lay a narrow cavity no deeper than a closet, and in the center, resting on a small cedar shelf at eye level, sat a copper document tube the length of my forearm, green with verdigris, except where someone had recently wiped it clean in 4 distinct finger marks. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely breathe, yet I lifted the tube with steady hands because Grandmother had taught me that courage is simply fear that has said its prayers. The cap unscrewed with a soft rasp, and inside, rolled tight as a scroll, was a single sheet of heavy drafting vellum, the kind we used before computers stole the smell of ink and possibility from our fingers. I carried it upstairs into the library where morning light now poured through the tall windows, unrolled it on the mahogany table where Grandmother once taught me perspective, and felt the floor tilt beneath my feet. It was a foundation plan for a luxury resort, but this drawing was older, dated 1994, signed in the lower corner with a signature I recognized from birthday cards and Christmas letters, C. Vance. Grandmother had drawn it. Right across the entire sheet, angry red lines slashed through the load-bearing walls and support columns. In my grandmother's unmistakable handwriting, written so forcefully the pen had torn the vellum in places, were the words that made my heart stop. Deliberate structural flaw. Unethical. The line further explained that if built as specified, the east wing would collapse within 5 years, killing anyone standing beneath it. They knew this, and they were willing to silence anyone who found out. I stood staring until the letters blurred, until the winter light shifted and the house itself seemed to lean over my shoulder to read what it had guarded for 3 decades. I realized that someone had hidden evidence that the Thorne family had planned to build on land they didn't yet own, with designs that would fail catastrophically, and they were willing to silence anyone who noticed. The copper tube remained in my trembling hands, its wiped fingerprints gleaming like accusations under the sun. Marcus had married me 12 years after this blueprint was hidden. He had spent years trying to buy this very coastline and had gone white as death when Walter mentioned the 30 years of stagnation. And now the perfect bait sat in my lap, a document that could destroy the Thorne reputation, tank every stock tied to their developments, reopen investigations into deaths labeled accidents. Or it could be the most elaborate trap ever laid. Marcus knew I would come here. Marcus knew I would search. Marcus had every reason to plant evidence that looked 30 years old, evidence that would force me to run to lawyers or journalists, evidence that could later be proven forged, leaving me discredited, ruined, locked away for fraud while he claimed concern for my delusional episode. I looked at the red slashes across my grandmother's elegant lines and felt ice crawl up my spine. I could not simply stare at grandmother's furious red slashes across the blueprint any longer. I needed to know whether the paper in my trembling hands was salvation or the cleverest cage Marcus had ever built. So I carried it upstairs to the attic room where she kept every survey, every deed, every hand-drawn map of this coastline since the day the first Vance stepped off a ship in 1793. The foundation grandmother had slashed to pieces was drawn for land that, according to the 1994 public record spread beneath it, still belonged to the state of Maine and to the Vance family trust in equal, unbreakable shares. The Thorne proposal quietly erased the public tideline, shifted the boundary stones 30 feet seaward, and laid the resort's east wing directly across what had always been protected commons. Grandmother's delicate architect's hand had traced the true property lines in faint blue pencil beside the forged ones, and in the margin she had written in letters so small I needed a magnifying glass to read them. They bribed the assessor. They will bury this evidence and anyone who speaks of it. She had drawn the damning truth 30 years ago, had hidden it behind a false wall instead of taking it to the newspapers or the Attorney General. And then, less than a year later, she had walked into the sea on a night when the tide was higher than anyone could remember and left a note that said only, "I am tired." I sat back on my heels among the scattered maps and felt the attic tilt around me, because now I understood the first terrible half of the story. The Thorne family had stolen public land through fraud, had planned to build a palace on a lie that would eventually collapse and kill innocent people, and grandmother had possessed proof that could have stopped them. She had chosen silence, and 6 months later, she was dead. But the second half remained cruelly out of reach. I gathered the maps and the blueprint into a careful pile, my hands no longer shaking because certainty of a different kind had settled in my bones. The Thorne family committed a crime that still bleeds beneath every glossy brochure they have ever printed about coastal legacy, and grandmother carried that knowledge to her grave. The copper tube lay on the table like a sleeping snake. I looked at the red slashes again, at the faint blue true boundaries grandmother had drawn with a hand that never stopped fighting, even when her heart did, and I understood that I now possessed the power to finish what she started. But the final question still waits in the shadows of this house. Was her death the sad ending of a woman who lost hope? Or was it the first murder in a dynasty that decided some land is worth more than a human life? Come here, my darling, and let me tell you how the wolf finally stepped out of the shadows and into the only house he was never meant to enter, because the moment Marcus crossed the threshold of Oakhaven, with snow still clinging to his coat and that familiar smile sharpened to a blade, I understood that every gentle threat he had ever whispered in Manhattan had only been practice for this single, suffocating afternoon. I was still standing among the scattered maps and the blueprint that carried grandmother's rage in red ink when the front door opened without a knock, and there he stood in the foyer, tall and immaculate and utterly certain that the world would rearrange itself the moment he walked into a room. He closed the door behind him with the soft, deliberate click of a man who knows no one will ever dare open it again without his permission. And when he looked up at me on the landing, his eyes held the same possessive warmth they had worn the night he first told me I would never need to work again because he would take care of everything forever. "You look half frozen, Eleanor," he said. "I took the precaution of securing our accounts while you were indulging this little rebellion," he continued, drawing his phone from his coat pocket and turning the screen toward me, so the frozen balances and canceled cards glowed between us like bars of a cage, freshly painted gold. "Everything is paused until you come to your senses and sign the papers the notary will deliver tomorrow morning." I descended the stairs slowly, each step measured, because I refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing me run. And when I reached the bottom, I stopped just close enough that the scent of his cologne wrapped around me like a memory I no longer wished to keep. "You drove through a blizzard to deliver this news in person," I said, and my voice carried a calm I had not known I possessed until that moment. How thoughtful. His smile deepened, the one that used to convince the world of his kindness, and he tucked his phone back into his pocket with the casual grace of a man setting a trap. He replied that he drove through the blizzard to watch me understand that nothing had changed. He stepped closer until the tip of his polished shoe touched the edge of the rug and said that I was out of money. I couldn't afford the taxes due in 28 days, couldn't keep the furnace running past next week, and couldn't even buy a gallon of milk without begging. He asserted that my lawyer would drop me the moment he realized there was no retainer coming. He pointed out that I couldn't pay the electricity bill to keep those romantic lights shining. I looked at the man who had taught me over 12 years that love and ownership could wear the same face, and I spoke the sentence I had carried in my heart since the moment I first held grandmother's blueprint. "I will live here the way she lived here," I said, meeting his gaze without flinching, with nothing but the truth in my hands and a deed that carries my name alone. And when you are ready to explain why your family needed this land so desperately that someone was willing to drown an old woman to get it, you will find me waiting with every light burning and every door unlocked. For one heartbeat, the smile froze on his face, something raw and ancient flickering behind the perfect mask, and then it returned colder than the storm outside. "Careful, Eleanor," he murmured, leaning close enough that I felt his breath against my cheek. "Some truths cost more than a woman can afford to pay." He turned then, walked back to the door, and paused with his hand on the knob long enough to deliver the final promise over his shoulder. "The next time I come through this door, you will sign, or I will take everything the law allows and everything it does not." After Marcus left with his final smile and the promise of worse to come, I stood in the silent library for a long time. I knew what I had to do, so I picked up the hidden phone with fingers that felt like ice and called Richard, the only lawyer brave enough to take my case. He answered on the first ring, voice tight with worry. "Ellie, tell me you're safe." "I am safe," I said, though the words tasted like a lie. "But Marcus has frozen everything, every account, every card, and I need you to file the divorce today, right now, before he can do more damage." A long silence stretched between us. "Ellie," he said at last, and the gentleness in his voice nearly broke me. "My firm cannot move forward without the retainer, 10,000 up front, and your husband has made certain there is no way for you to transfer even $10. I am truly sorry, but without cash, there is no case, no filing, no protection order, nothing." The phone slipped from my hand and clattered to the floor. No money, no lawyer, no heat, no food beyond what was already in the pantry. No way to pay the taxes that would seize this house in 28 days. I was exactly where he wanted me, alone, powerless, and completely at his mercy. The fire had burned down to embers, and the room grew colder by the minute. I wrapped my arms around myself and stared at the blueprint through eyes blurred with tears I refused to let fall, because if I started crying now, I might never stop. That was when I saw it. In the lower right corner, beneath grandmother's tiny signature, almost hidden by the angry red slash that crossed out the fraudulent boundary line, there was a smudge no larger than a fingerprint. I had noticed it before, but dismissed it as age or dirt. Yet now, in the failing light, something about the color made my heart stutter. I leaned closer, angling the vellum toward the last bit of lamplight. I noticed the smudge catching the light and changing from a dull rust to the exact coral pink of the nail polish my grandmother wore every summer since 1993. I knew the color and remembered she had painted it on her big toe, the same week she finished this drawing, when she laughed because it was called Rebel Coral and matched the fire in her soul. I realized the smudge was not accidental. It was my grandmother's thumbprint, pressed deliberately into the still wet ink the day she rolled up the blueprint and hid it. It was a private mark no forger could replicate because that exact shade of nail polish no longer existed. I touched the smudge with a finger that no longer trembled, and the truth flowed through me like warm blood. This was real, not a trap. My grandmother had reached across 30 years of silence and placed her living hand upon mine. She was reminding me that the fight was never over, that she had left me the weapon she couldn't use herself, and that even from the depths of her soul, she never stopped refusing to sign. The generator had died hours ago, and the only light came from the moon pouring through the tall windows like cold silver mercy, turning the library into a place of shadows and memory. I had wrapped myself in every blanket I could find, yet the cold still crept through the cracks, the way Marcus's voice had crept through every crack in my life, and for a long time I simply sat on the window seat staring at the blueprint spread across the table, the coral pink thumbprint glowing faintly whenever the moonlight touched it. I had been asking the wrong question all day. I had been asking whether the drawing was real or a forgery, whether it was salvation or a trap, whether I dared take it to the authorities and risk being destroyed by lawyers who could prove it was planted. But grandmother had never intended for this to reach prosecutors or newspapers or any public stage where the Thorne family's army of attorneys could tear it apart. She had hidden it behind a false wall in a house that would one day belong to her granddaughter alone. And she had marked it with nail polish that no longer existed anywhere else on earth, because she knew that only blood would recognize blood. I leaned closer, tracing the red slashes with a finger that no longer shook, and suddenly I saw what she had seen 30 years ago when she rolled the vellum and sealed it away. The deliberate structural flaw was not merely criminal negligence, it was catastrophic on a scale that would collapse the entire East Wing within 5 years of completion, killing dozens, if not hundreds of guests. And the insurance investigations that followed would inevitably uncover the forged boundary lines and the stolen public land. The Thorne family would lose everything the moment the first lawsuit was filed. But if the flaw was quietly revealed to the right competitor, that competitor would know exactly why the Thorne design could never be built safely. And the mere whisper of that knowledge would tank Thorne stock overnight, scare away investors, and force the board to abandon the main development forever. One that could be handed privately to the highest bidder among Marcus's enemies, or simply threatened to be handed, and the Thorne empire would bleed billions without a single headline ever mentioning murder or suicide or stolen tidelines. I realized that grandmother had given me the power to destroy them without having to prove anything publicly, and without risking that they might discredit the blueprint or discredit me. All I had to do was refuse to play by the rules Marcus understood. I sat in the moonlight for a long time, feeling the weight of 30 years of silence lift from the house and settle on my shoulders like a cloak I was finally strong enough to wear. The cold no longer touched me. I picked up the hidden phone, its battery almost dead but still holding enough charge for one call, and I dialed the number I once knew as home. He answered on the second ring, his voice hoarse with sleep and triumph. "Eleanor, calling to beg?" I told Marcus that I was calling to give him a choice. Meet me tomorrow at Oakhaven, alone, at noon. I instructed him to bring any papers he wanted me to sign, and I would bring something he would want to buy at any cost. A long silence stretched across the miles, broken only by his breathing and the faint creak of the house listening. Finally, he said that I had nothing he wanted, but the certainty in his voice had thinned. I replied that we would see. I repeated the time and place and told him to come alone or spend the rest of his life waiting for news he couldn't survive. I ended the call before he could reply. Afterward, I folded the blueprint with careful, reverent hands, tucked it back into the copper tube, and carried it upstairs to the bedroom that had always been mine. The moon followed me through every window, lighting the path like a grandmother walking beside her granddaughter on the night she finally came home to finish what had been started long ago. He crossed the room with the same deliberate stride he used in boardrooms where billions changed hands, placed the folder in front of me as though it were a treaty already signed, and spoke first in the velvet tone that had ended every argument we ever had. "Sign these papers, Eleanor, and we end the unpleasantness today. The accounts will be restored by nightfall, the divorce handled discreetly with a settlement generous enough to keep you in comfort for the rest of your life, and we can both pretend this little rebellion never happened." I did not touch the folder. Instead, I opened the copper tube with the same reverence I once watched grandmother use when she uncorked a bottle of wine saved for a victory that never came, drew out the blueprint that carried her coral pink thumbprint like a battle standard, and laid it between us so the red slashes caught the sunlight and bled across the mahogany. Marcus's gaze locked on the drawing and something raw flickered behind the perfect mask. "This blueprint will not go to the prosecutor," I said. "It will not go to newspapers or investigators or any courtroom where your lawyers can tear it apart and bury me with claims of forgery. This blueprint, complete with the deliberate structural flaw that would collapse your East Wing and kill dozens within 5 years, along with proof that the entire resort would sit on land you stole from the public trust, will be delivered by hand to Victor Langford at Coastal Crown Developments within 24 hours, unless you give me what I came here for." He replied that Langford was a vulture who fed on rumors, and he wouldn't pay anything for a 30-year-old blueprint that couldn't be authenticated. His voice was smooth but thinner, like ice beginning to crack. I slid a single photograph across the table, the one I had taken at dawn showing the blueprint next to the original 1994 town map with the forged boundary lines glowing like scars. I continued, meeting his gaze without flinching, that Langford didn't need to authenticate anything in court. He only needed to know that every Thorn Holdings coastline bid over the next decade would be quietly undercut by a competitor. That competitor understood exactly why his designs were uninsurable death traps built on land he never legally owned. I concluded that the market would do the rest, and his board would tear him apart long before any prosecutor ever saw this room. Marcus stared at the photograph, and the color drained from his face so completely that for one heartbeat he looked like the boy he must have been when his father first taught him that some crimes are only crimes if someone dares to speak. He had just opened his mouth when his phone rang with a sharp sound. The screen displayed emergency board meeting. His hand hesitated slightly before he answered, his voice turning into raw steel. I couldn't hear what the other side said, but I witnessed the cracking. His shoulders slumped, his eyes darting from the blueprint to me in horror. All certainty shattered. Langford had acted quickly. I had only sent the photo of the boundary discrepancy, but it was enough to start the avalanche. Stocks plummeting, investors panicking, and the board meeting urgently because of rumors that Thorn Holdings was bidding on tainted land. "You played me," he whispered, and the words came out cracked and small. "No," I answered, gathering the blueprint with hands that no longer trembled. "I simply played the only game your family ever taught me was worth winning." The silence that followed belonged to the house, to grandmother, to every woman who had ever been told her silence was the price of safety. Marcus looked at the folder he had brought, then at the blueprint in my hands, and for the first time in his life, he understood what it felt like to stand on ground that was no longer his. He stood across from me with the phone still clenched in his hand, the emergency board notification burning white against his palm, and every trace of the man who had once convinced the world he was invincible drained away until only a husband who had miscalculated stood in his place. I did not gloat. I simply waited until the silence became unbearable, then spoke in the calm, steady voice I had practiced in the dark while grandmother's thumbprint glowed beside me. "Here are the terms that end this today," I said, sliding the single sheet across the mahogany where generations of Vance women had signed their freedom into being. "Immediate no-fault divorce filed this afternoon. Oak Haven Manor and every acre of coastline transferred to me alone. Recorded before the courthouse closes. Every joint account unfrozen and exactly half-wired to an account controlled solely by me. $50 million in compensatory damages placed in escrow by 5 o'clock, enough to open the studio I was never allowed to have. In exchange, the blueprint, the photographs, every digital trace of what your family planned 30 years ago vanishes forever into a safe deposit box only I can open. Sign, Marcus, and you keep the empire your father built on stolen land and deliberate death traps. Refuse, and Langford receives the complete structural analysis before the opening bell tomorrow, and your board finishes what I started. He stared at the paper as though the words themselves might bite, and when he finally spoke, his voice had lost every layer of silk it once possessed. "You would destroy everything for this house?" he asked, and the question came out small, almost pleading. "I am not destroying anything," I answered, resting my hand over grandmother's coral pink thumbprint so he could see exactly whose fight he had walked into. "I am simply refusing to let you keep what was never yours to take. Your board is already tearing itself apart because Langford whispered just enough to make them doubt every coastal bid you have ever made. By tomorrow, the stock will be in free fall. By the end of the week, the name Thorne will be poison, and every secret you thought was buried will rise like tide. Sign the papers, Marcus, or watch the empire your father killed for collapse, because one woman finally decided her name was worth more than your money." He looked at me for a long, long moment, and I saw the exact second the fight left him. The second he understood that the game had never been about love or marriage or even land, but about who was willing to lose everything to win. He picked up the pen. His hand trembled as he signed page after page, the same hand that had once traced promises across my skin in the dark. And when the last signature was complete, he pushed the documents toward me without meeting my eyes. "It is done," he said, and the words fell into the quiet room like stones into deep water. "It is done," I repeated, gathering the papers that now made me a woman with a house that carried my name alone, and enough money to build whatever future I chose. He walked to the door, paused with his hand on the knob as though he might still find something to say that could change the ending, and spoke without turning. "You could have had the world with me." "I have the only part that was ever mine," I answered. The door closed behind him with the soft finality of a book no one will ever open again. 6 weeks later, the divorce was final, the transfers complete, the blueprint sealed away where only I will ever find it. I stood on the widow's walk the morning the papers arrived and watched the ice break in the cove below, great sheets cracking and drifting out to sea, the way every chain he ever forged around me had finally cracked and drifted away. The sign went up the following Monday. Vance Coastal Studio, hand-carved cedar painted the exact shade of grandmother's rebel coral. Sarah came to the opening, and we stood on the porch drinking champagne from jelly glasses because the crystal had all belonged to him. "To women who refuse to sign," she said, raising her glass to the sea. "To women who finally learn how to write their own names," I answered. And somewhere far away, the Thorne Empire kept its shrinking stock price and its buried secrets, while here on the cliffs, a new building rose, one with windows that open to the wind, foundations that will never collapse, and a deed that carries only one name, mine. The wind carried salt and gulls, and the sound of waves that have learned to speak only the truth. I am home, and I am free. Come here, my sweet friend, closer. Let me dry your tears and hold your hand for just one more moment, because this story is finished, but our time together does not have to be. Did you feel it with me? That moment when the chains finally snapped and the woman who had been told she was nothing stood up and took back her name? Tell me, darling, did it touch something inside you too? Where are you watching from tonight? Which city? Which little room? Which quiet corner of the world is holding you right now? Drop it in the comments below. I read every single one, and when I see your city or your country light up, my heart feels a little less alone. If this story gave you even one breath of hope, one spark of, I can do this too, then please, find the little heart. Press it hard. Share it with another woman who needs to hear that she is stronger than they told her. And if you can, if your heart feels full enough tonight, send me a super thanks. Even the smallest one keeps the light on so I can keep telling these stories for every mother, every grandmother, every daughter who is still waiting for her own Oak Haven moment. Thank you from the deepest part of me for staying with me until the very last word. You are the reason I tell them. On your screen right now, you will see 2 new real-life stories I chose especially for hearts like yours. Click 1. Stay with me a little longer. There are so many more waiting on the channel. Hundreds of nights we can spend together. Don't forget to subscribe and ring that little bell so you never miss the next time a woman finds her way home. Until then, I am keeping the porch light on for you. With all my love and respect, see you in the comments and in the next story. Good night, my brave, beautiful friend. You are never alone.